Yo, 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 and welcome back to the Banter Boys podcast. My name is Sanji, with me is Evan and Theo. How you doing, boys?
I'm good, thank you.
I thought one of you guys would have done the welcome, you know? How's it going, lads?
Good. How are you?
Not bad. Trying to enjoy the rare days of sunshine that we get in the UK. How are you enjoying your summer so far, Evan?
It's been nice. Really hot here in New York City, but I've been playing a lot of footy, which has been good. But yeah, solid summer.
Is there a particular position that you play?
Right back usually.
Oh, okay. All right. Inspired by any footballer?
Yeah, Trent-esque, you know? I like putting the ball in a lot.
Okay, all right. First pick for next season's draft then. Let's go.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Theo?
Not bad. You know, I've been playing cricket this summer. Have you, of course?
Yeah. It's been an interesting cricket season so far.
Yeah, the weather seems to have held up for when we've played, at least.
Yeah. I still can't properly tell people that I sustained a hamstring injury playing cricket. Like, it's one of the most embarrassing things ever. And then I need to go into detail. Oh, it was a really hot day and I was running around a lot, etc., you know. But I'd say we're enjoying the cricket season as much as we can. But yeah, so listeners, welcome back to the Banter Boys podcast. I know it's been a while since you've heard from us. We've been enjoying the break, you know, just taking it easy. Don't worry, we're going to be back with our regular scheduled Inside Track series, regular pod series during the season and stuff like that. But this is a bit of a special episode. This episode is going to be all about dynasty leagues, and it's kind of interesting. I find like I'm coming across individuals in our Fantrax community that are trying dynasty for the first time. We got a lot of requests from listeners DMing us, hey, we need advice, how do you set this up, how do you do this, how do you do that? So I thought, you know what, instead of answering and everyone individually on like some messaging service, you know, let's just have a chat, right? Get all the questions out of the way, shoot the shit, and let's see what we can come up with to kind of help our community out there, right? So before we get started, you know, I just want to have a bit of an intro chat. So just to kind of gauge your dynasty experience, you know, regardless of whether it's about football or maybe NFL, etc. I'll start with you, Evan. How long or how many times have you tried, you know, dynasty leagues?
Let me think. I think, actually, sorry. Okay, so I've had two Dynasty Leagues. The one that we're in is my second.
Yeah.
The one that I did before that was, I think I started playing in it 2 years ago, but it had been a really long running one. And I took over a team that was falling apart. So yeah, it's been about 2.5 years for me, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that's another common theme I was hearing from people is like they're taking over a team for the first time, and for some reason a lot of people keep inheriting these really shit teams as well. Is that
Yeah.
is that what you kind of faced as well?
Yeah, it was. I think I had like a couple good old aging players. And I pivoted to youth like really quickly. It worked out fairly well because people weren't very active on waivers.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely a poor team.
Yeah. Theo, what about yourself? What's your dynasty experience like? I mean, you kind of adopted me and Evan, right, into your league. But before that, you know, how long have you been playing it?
So, yeah, just NFL, to be honest, for, I think, 3 years. And then, obviously, being English and mainly being Premier League fans, it's kind of, as much as the NFL dynasty is great fun, it's like, how can we kind of harness this and make it work in the Premier League? There's obviously so many differences that make it difficult, but we'll get on to how we try and do that. But yeah, it's been great fun the first season doing it. I've been the commissioner of the league, as you kind of alluded to, so we've done one season. I feel like it was decent success, and
yeah,
the league feels like it's in perfectly good health to continue. So yeah, I think we're going well.
Yeah, I think we are quite blessed with the group of lads that we've gotten together to run this Dynasty League. And I think that is quite important as well in running a successful Dynasty League, be it maybe 1 or 2 years or even 8 years, is which our plan is, right? We'll see how many of us actually stick around for that long, but I'm gonna try my best. I'm gonna try my best. So I mean, kind of touching on the fact that we're all part of the same Dynasty League, I was wondering, Theo, if you can maybe give us or give the listeners a brief overview of what the structure of our Dynasty League is like. Because I feel like every time we talk in our group chat, I'm constantly learning new dynamics about a league that I've never ever discovered before. Like, for example, what the hell is a taxi squad?
Yeah, so taxi squad is borrowed from NFL, and it's where you kind of put your young rookie players who aren't really going to feature in that particular season. And you put them there, and they kind of, I think the term taxi is to suggest they get taxied to year 2 or 3 without being part of your squad, but they're your players. And so we've kind of decided we're going to adopt that this season with an academy where you pick up the really young players as far as Fantrax allows you, because obviously the really young players they don't tend to cover, but as we've mentioned, we're going to probably do that after the first round of the League Cup, because that's when they will add players that feature in that round, and then you'll be stashing these players for next season or the season after until they become, say, over 19. It just rewards you for kind of recognising these young players' abilities and ceilings without using a full squad spot, that because you know they're not going to play at all this season, and it makes the league more competitive that way, rather than 1 or 2 guys just fill full bench of Harry Maguires winning the league because everyone else is protecting kids for a year's time. Whereas this way you can do that strategy, but also have players on your bench.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
Go ahead.
So you just generally, you were asking about the structure of the league. So there's 14 people. It was a nucleus of maybe, like, I don't know the numbers, maybe 8 or 9 from my home league, and then we kind of complemented it with some different people from different leagues that wanted in, and it just kind of made a nice mix of personalities, people from different countries. But as I think the nucleus was key in terms of sustainability, like it just means that if it really didn't go very well, then we can kind of shrink the league to me and my mates again, and we'll make it work. But I think that also allowed us to confidently go with 14, because people know that the league's not just going to fold next year. They know that it's going to stick around, and so people aren't scared to go for the kind of rebuild mode straight away, because that can be an issue in some dynasty leagues, because people think, what's the point of me going for a sort of slow start if the league won't exist by the time my team matures? Whereas I think we're all confident that there's going to be cycles and everyone's going to have a chance to peak.
I think all 3 of us have fairly different strategies as well. I mean, when we joined the league for the first time last season, Evan, my goal was, I'm just trying to win this season. I don't care about after that. I came very close, right? Yeah. But I think maybe this season and next season would probably be my last opportunities before my squad absolutely falls apart or retires from the league or something like that. But what has your strategy been, Evan, for our league so far? How would you describe it?
As you said, I pretty much completely played it the opposite. And I was like, okay, I don't care about winning this year whatsoever. I'm going to kind of go against the grain and get guys that I think are undervalued because they might not be as good this year, whether it be injury or they're just young and like on a good pathway to success. So I've very much like targeted around like the 21 to 23-year-old guys, like the Pedro Netos and Michael Elise's of the world. Sometimes that pans out with Neto. Sometimes it doesn't, and Elise goes to Bayern. And just to like give a little bit of context there, the way I thought about it was, as an American, I played a lot of FIFA career mode, which is just like Football Manager. But basically, like, you take over a team, and I'd always sell anyone above like 27 years old, make a bunch of profit, and then like buy all the promising like youth guys with high potentials, or like high potentials on Football Manager. And so that's kind of how I started my team as well.
Basically, like half the Chelsea squad. So,
Yeah.
Theo, I think you have almost a mix of both of our strategies, right? And it's kind of interesting because one of your picks was kind of similar to Evan's, where, Olise going to Bayern, you had Kane gone off to Bayern already, right? So it's interesting being in a dynasty league. At what point do you consider just holding on to that dead weight in quotation marks versus, you have a really good pick, and certain assets like those guys, there's a good chance that they come back to the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, so with Harry Kane, it was obviously just days after the draft, and I knew this. It wasn't like I was shocked that he went. I weighed up the kind of probability of him going and just took a bet on it. And I also think in a way, I took one for the team in terms of the league, because it's really hurt my team. But as the commissioner, I think the fact I'm probably the least competitive team means that when I'm making decisions and rule changes, as we're still quite new, I'm not really doing it with my team in mind. I'm kind of like a punching bag at the moment, and I've backed myself to come back with a lot of young players. But for the first few seasons, it's just a case of every kind of major rule change will be democratic and will go through votes. And like, although I have the power to decide, I can't really give myself an advantage because my first round pick left the country within days. And then, as you saw, I held him all season, knowing he's going to come back to England for the record at some point. But having watched him in the Euros, that was enough for me to drop him there and then. Because I don't care when he comes back, he does not look like he's going to be particularly good. So, I think he'll stay in Germany for maybe another 2 years. He's still quite young, but he doesn't look particularly. I know he's injured, let's say, but I didn't fancy it. I think when the way we did keeper league rather than full dynasty means I could afford to drop him, and he's literally dropped off the system. So it's not like someone can swoop in and take him. He is gone until he's back, and then who knows? Maybe someone wins him in an auction.
Yeah. The streets will never forget. But I just kind of want to touch again about how our Dynasty League is structured. So right now, we started maybe like a couple of weeks ago, right? We had a bit of a draft in a sense, right? We were drafting the promoted players and a couple of stragglers that were in the free agency pool in a sense. So like, can you maybe touch on that draft and, just briefly kind of describe, what else is kind of coming up until the season starts, like including like waiver claims and other drafts, etc., that we might have?
Yeah, so we wanted to do a draft, reverse league standings, but then we decided to do it on July the 1st because it allows us to be consistent every year. Let's just fix that date. And it means that players come into the system, such as Amari Hutchinson, aren't there on that day, and that is unfortunate. But then, as we saw, the fewer good players coming into this draft means that the first round collapses quite quickly, and so the reverse league standings does still hold up slightly. Like towards the end of the first round in this draft was already really poor.
Well, come on, Adam Armstrong is a great player.
I'm not sure about that. So yeah, we did that. It was just to kind of tidy up all the people that had been let go when we were doing keepers. Just a reshuffle, so some people would pick up players that others had dropped because they maybe didn't fit into their strategy but are still good enough. And obviously the promoted players. And we've decided as a league generally that the fairest way to distribute the really good new signings is by a fab auction. And therefore, by doing the draft early, we capture more and more players into the auction. And because it's Dynasty and not a redraft league, we're more than happy to wait until the transfer window is fully closed before we start the auction, which is obviously important because if the window is still open, you might get bigger players coming and you might not know how to spend your fab. This way, everyone knows that, say, the first 3 weeks of the season will be with our kind of weakened squads, and that's just so be it. It's a small part of the season. It's not going to affect much. And then we'll have this auction, and it will be, what was it? Every time there was a bid, we added 24 hours to the closing time. I think the best time we did it was during the international break. So not only after the window closed, but maybe a week or two after, when we've got a 2-week window between games, was the best time, just to allow us to clear up auctions. And then towards the end of the second week of that break, you kind of sped up auctions and established that they had to go at kind of 1 hour rather than 24 hours. And then we had a simultaneous, Ben called it the pond scum draft, where we would also do auction for players who really were rubbish but were new, and they didn't need a headline slot in the auction, but if you wanted to pick up some clown for 2 fab, then by all means have a bid and someone else gets the chance to see it. And then,
yeah, I think that's where you're drafting like your Disassis and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then after that, we'll be doing the draft for the taxi squads. So even though we're in our second season, it will be our first draft for that. And we'll be looking, we haven't ironed out the rules yet, but it will be drafting, say, under 19 players. As I said, waiting for the League Cup just to beef up the number of players there are in the system at that age. And then we'll be going for maybe 5 players, we haven't decided the number yet, 5 each to stash for a season. And then we also want to thinking about a kind of mechanism where someone can try and take someone out of your academy for a fixed fab compensation, and then you have the choice to also, I don't think you would have to pay the fab, but you can promote them to your squad, drop someone else, and they remain your player. It just kind of mimics real life, but also just means that if someone's got a squad teeming with talent, then it's quite nice to kind of force them to promote the player if they're just stashing someone who's actually really good and playing games at such a young age.
Who would you say, like, I'll ask both of you guys, Evan, you can answer first, is who would you say is one of the most prized Dynasty assets you can possibly get at the moment? I know that's very wide-ranging question.
Any age group, you mean? You're not talking about taxi?
Yeah,
it's any of like the English studs that are on the younger side, right? The Bukayo Saka's, Phil Foden, etc.
Yeah. So they would be having such an active role within their club, but they still are such a young age, right?
Right. And the English aspect means they're less likely to leave the league. But yeah, it's really a component of age plus club, plus contract, plus do they actually score good fantasy points compared to how good they are in real life. But yeah.
What about you, Theo? Who would you consider a top asset?
That is the massive difference between NFL and the Premier League, is the kind of fact that players leave the league much more frequently. And I kind of approach it like Sean Dyche and look at British players first, knowing just the odds of them staying is significantly higher. They don't have to be British. There could be certain cultural players, like, you know, who might stick around, like who are less likely to go to other big leagues. So I'm just thinking
Olise, perhaps.
When you have a player who's, say, from France,
doesn't sound bitter at all, by the way.
When you have these,
go on.
When you have these players who are French, they're Spanish, they're Italian, the chance of them going to a major league is obviously much higher than, say, if you had a Ukrainian player. Of course they could go anywhere, but there's just that extra chance that they've settled in England and they're not looking to move home at the age of 25, 26 in the same way that a Portuguese player or a Spanish player might do. So it's very nuanced, but it's just something to think about. And then another thing is just, will they keep their spot in their team forever? You could easily have a player that's going to play in the Premier League for the next 8 years, but goes 6 months without a game, or even just is in and out they rotate their spot at left back every week with someone else.
Yeah.
Like, say, it's not worth keeping them, is it? So, it's all about just utility, really. And then, as Evan says, don't forget scoring. Like, it's kind of pointless if you find 11 players who are going to play every week for the next 10 years, but none of them score any points. Like, in our draft, Mark Gahey was available, right? Until I think maybe didn't even get picked up, and no one has any doubts he's a good player. He's English. He's going to stick around for years. Probably get moved to a bigger club, but he scores negative points half the time, so no one was interested in him, and I think that's something that shouldn't be underrated.
Yeah. I'm a little disappointed no one suggested Declan Rice, but that's a bit of an inside joke. Before we move on, actually, Theo, is there anything else you kind of want to touch on in terms of the structure of our Dynasty League? Any interesting points you think the listeners might be keen to know of? Evan, you want to say something? Sorry?
Yeah, I just wanted to call one thing out as related to Fab. It might be obvious for some, but I think like with the auction for new players having Fab in it and it being a Dynasty League, the carryover of Fab from season to season is like a very important strategic element here, where if, say, like you're doing poorly at the end of the season, you could potentially trade your good, maybe older players for Fab to teams that are competing, and then you have extra Fab for the auction the next year. So it might be obvious, but just wanted to call it out.
Yeah, I mean, not even just selling good experienced players. One of the strategies that you've kind of used in one of our more recent drafts is selling draft pick positions, right, for Fab, or the guarantee that, you know, you can get like an Omari Kellerman, for example, is a deal that we did as well, right? And you're kind of just getting your Fab, getting it ready for the auction. Because I want to say auction day or auction week, let's call it, has to be one of the most fun periods that I've experienced in our Dynasty League.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Theo, is there any final points or anything you want to touch on structure before we move on?
I just wanted to make it clear, if it's not obvious, that it's kind of up to the league and the commissioner how to bend these rules into how you want it. There is no hard and fast rule for Premier League Dynasty. Like it's impossible to get it perfect, I think, and I think a lot of what has made our league work so well is just people willing to be flexible, people willing to maybe a rule goes against them and then the next rule goes for them, and it kind of it's not too competitive either. I think with the way Dynasty works and the way you could be locked into certain performance for years, it's not really, for me anyway, not set up for like a big money competitive league. I think if you want to do that, then play redraft. I think Dynasty is for long-term punts on players you like, things coming back around to haunt someone from a trade they did 3 years ago. It's kind of those kind of good fun. That's what we play it for as well. Is just especially with making friends, playing with old friends, and just having a laugh about, as you say, Declan Rice. Like, it's an inside joke, but that point was he was drafted high in the first round, or not towards the end of the first round.
Yeah.
Most of us laughed because it shouldn't have been picked then. Happens to have started taking corners and being given a free role in midfield half the time and scoring a lot of points. So suddenly he probably is a top 12 player, but that doesn't always equate to first round pick, but due to consistency and ceilings and things like that. But I just think it's all about having fun in the Dynasty to me. I think
Agreed.
If you want to make some money, play some redraft or have a bet.
Yeah. Yeah, it's honestly a great brotherhood that we've kind of formed in that group, and the bands are top as well. Honestly, it's great. I would highly recommend it to anyone that loves playing fan tracks, loves playing draft. Definitely give Dynasty a taste, and you know, it also gives you an opportunity to go above and beyond in terms of your football knowledge, in terms of, you know, how clubs actually structure deals for certain players, because, you know, you might be structuring deals in a similar way in your own Dynasty League, right? Or even knowing the ins and outs of all clubs, you know, hearing this kid coming in, this kid going out. And, you know, even with the whole PSR rules, and I don't want to dive too much into this and make this a whole political debate about football, but it kind of forces your hand to learn a lot about what I think the average football fan isn't aware of. All right, let's move on. Evan, before we jump into the questions, toolkits. You are a master at them, right? And I think there's something brewing in the background. Is there something you want to maybe hint at, tease slightly?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of you might be familiar with the Fantasy Toolkit. that exists for the Draft Society, and that's for redraft, like week to week. It's telling you, projections for your players, who should you maybe pick or drop or whatever. How does your team stack up against teams in other leagues, etc. It's basically like an automated, personalized tool that's meant to give you suggestions and help you manage your team week to week. So with that in mind, I thought it would be fun to make a more dynasty tailored one. And with, again, the concept of the good players today might not be the good players tomorrow, and vice versa. And as such, I have begun working on a tool that helps you evaluate how good players are in Dynasty. And so without going like way too in the weeds, I've done a lot of the work of pulling in the necessary data that you'd want to know if you're a Dynasty manager. So as some of the things I touched on before, is, okay, obviously how old the player is, what is their nationality, what is their contract situation, what team they play for, what am I forgetting? A bunch of other stuff, but basically like anything that is relevant to Dynasty and evaluation over time. I've begun doing a little bit of work and research on like development curves over time for different positions and different age groups. That's kind of in the weeds, but again, it's really trying to help you future plan and understand the value of guys. Okay, someone who is really good, a really good 28-year-old who scores really good fantasy points now, how does that compare to a 22-year-old who's not that great, but has a high transfer value and hence like could be good in the future, right? Evan Ferguson versus Ollie Watkins or something like that, right? Yeah. So anyways, some visualizations, some stuff there to just kind of help you evaluate players. But it's an ongoing process I'm having fun with, but I will very much release it soon.
Lovely. Excited to see that. I mean, Dynasty in general is an ongoing process, right? We're constantly evolving as a group of guys, the league as well. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to what you are coming up with, because listen, the redraft toolkit that you built, I mean, if you've used it, I don't think I need to praise it more than the experience that people have had with it. So yeah,
thank
definitely
you.
Looking forward to it. All right, let's jump into some questions, guys. We got some questions from listeners, fans across X, Twitter, whatever you call it, Discord. So we'll answer them one at a time. I'll just read out the questions. I'll let you guys take a crack at it. So we've got a few questions Dynasty related from Mark Torbit at Mark_Torbit. So his first question is about rookies. Is this like NFL fantasy where we would draft a certain amount of younger players in the academies? So I'll let Theo answer first and then Evan.
Yeah, so as we mentioned earlier, it is similar. We're going to bring in taxi squads that we'll probably call academies. And yeah, the premise is if you want to win long term, then you need to get it right on young players. I think the league is too competitive, and for us to just pick up the best players now and think we can sustain that. I think you might have a lucky couple of seasons, but there'll be a couple of managers in this league that have been building a squad under the radar that will just dominate in years to come if you don't think about youth in setting up your roster.
Anything to touch on, Evan? Anything to add?
No, not much. That covers it.
Cool. Next question, roster size. How big is the roster for a Dynasty Prem League?
So we have 14 teams and 25 players in each, and that's before we've got taxi squads. I think it's important to have a big bench because, well, for a couple of reasons. One was to stop the player pool being any good. I know that can be annoying when you want to pick up players, but as we established last season, this league isn't for week to week pickups. Like if you want to, we've all played in other leagues, redraft leagues. That's where you do those pickups. For example, same reason we don't have open free agency. You have to pick a player up on a waiver each day, so you can't wait for lineups and pick up players. By making the player pool poor, it just stops people kind of constantly rolling their squad around when they get an injury. You need to go deep and pick players who can contribute. I think basically every player in my squad would have been starting at some point, unless it was someone I was deliberately holding for the future. And then linked to that is you want to be incentivized to have young players on your bench for the future. If we had a bench of, say, 5 players, then as soon as you go through an injury run, you'd start dropping your young players, which is what the whole league is about. So it's kind of to give you room for all of these things.
Yeah. So, Evan, I'll let you take the next question. Does Fantrax even have a pool of younger guys to draft from?
Yeah, Theo touched on this a bit earlier. They definitely have a good chunk of younger players, even those that don't consistently get Prem minutes. It kind of evolves throughout the season. And so, for instance, like when the Cup games start coming up and Premier League teams involve more of their youth players within like the training setup, then the feeds and the rosters kind of get more of those younger players. But it's a pretty healthy mix. I think you'd be surprised. Just like understanding the typical redraft player pool, there's a lot of guys that you don't happen to see, but they very much are there. So yeah, anything to add there, Theo, that I didn't cover?
Yeah, as you say, it kind of there were a lot of players on the system last season that have disappeared and will come back once they start getting back into League Cup squads and FA Cup squads, things like that. So yeah, we've kind of decided that again, it's just play it as Fantrax allows you to. Like, don't get hung up about the fact that this 16-year-old wonder kid you're aware of is not in the game. There's likely to be other people in the league that know of that player. Just wait until they turn up. If they're really good, they will turn up at a very young age. It's just how it is. There's no point being frustrated by it. There's certainly players that I want in my roster that were on the system, aren't now. So be it. I'll wait until they turn up and try and get them in then.
So it's basically like, United, Chelsea, any of these Prem clubs, they show up in like the FA Cup, for example, and you look at their bench and you see an unknown name. All of a sudden, probably the next day, they're going to pop up in Fantrax. That's usually how it works.
Yeah.
Right? Cool. So Theo, I'll let you take this one. Actually, we already kind of touched on this in terms of basic rules. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't think we need to beat the drum again about this. If you want to know our basic rules, rewind a little bit, and I think you'll get the gist of it.
One thing I was going to mention was we decided to split the league after a certain number of game weeks, just so that people don't get fixtured out of the league. Say there's a title race at the end of the season, and then the guy who's top is just playing against teams who have sold the house to build next season. We want the top 6 or 7 to play against each other for the last, say, I think we played 2 rounds of fixtures against each other at the end there, and it just meant that every game was more competitive, and then the guys at the bottom were just kind of moving from places, but they kind of, their season's over anyway. As we've said, people play in other leagues. If you're building for 3 years' time and there's 5 weeks to go in the league, you're not playing to win, really, but no, we don't want to punish those people. We don't want to put them off kind of fielding a poor team for the league. Like, the whole reason in the split is to keep the integrity without people feeling pressure to kind of field a good team and not being able to build. There's different paths to take, and I think it worked quite well last season.
Yeah, and our scoring system is default, right?
Yes.
Is it?
Well, except for the 100 points for the goalie scoring, but...
have you guys ever faced one of those scenarios?
Yeah, Alisson scoring when we had 100
that
points
was brutal. Oh, I mean, I lost a head-to-head match, but I didn't get the 100-point deduction. It felt like that, though, to be fair. So.
I think in our league when it happened, the person who had Alisson was about 80 points behind, and it was the last game of the game week in the last minute. So that yeah, it was definitely the reason we kept that rule was because of how dramatic it was.
That's crazy. All right, final question from Mark. Draft strategy for players outside of the Prem. How does that work if you feel like a transfer could potentially happen? Theo, you want to take this one?
So we don't do anything because we wait for them to turn up, but I don't want to discourage people from trying something else. By all means, it could be interesting if you were to say, use a Google spreadsheet or something to work out who owned these players because they're not obviously on Fantrax. If you wanted to try and get, say, Lamine Yamal in your Dynasty squad, then albeit that sounds pretty fun. But yeah, we've not gone with that. But yeah, by all means, if people have success doing something like that, we'd love to hear it. Like it would be a pretty cool thing to do, but I think it could get quite messy.
Yeah. Cool. Any suggestions, Evan?
Yeah, I'm aware. I think there's another Dynasty League that plays like that, that Toddy's in. And I was advising him a bit on who to draft when they were originally setting it up. Just quick word of advice there. Like, I think it, again, tends to be English players abroad who have a higher likelihood to come to the league. And then, of course, like the young stars, as Theo mentioned as well.
Yeah, fair. All right, Mark, thank you for your questions. We'll go on to the next one. So this is from Draft Espresso. So still on the whole Dynasty vibe. What up, fellas? Just starting my Dynasty journey. He's taking over a team, right? So something that you would have done, Evan. Thinking of moving for a couple of recently relegated guys who might get moves back to the PL. Right now, I'm looking at Zeki Amdouni. What other players do you think have a chance of being picked up by a PL team? I'm going to throw a name out there, Evan, but definitely throw out who you think. Doughty is the one that
I knew that was going to be the one you said.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fitting because Evan and I did a deal that involved Doughty, right? And I ended up dropping Doughty because, I wasn't sure he was coming back into the league. So what would you do in this case? What would your advice be, Evan?
Yeah. It's definitely a tricky one. Assuming you have like the ability to, of course, draft these guys. Yeah, I mean, it kind of is just dependent on news. And how good players were the previous year, right? So it's gonna obviously tend to be like the best players from the relegated clubs, but it's of course contract dependent, transfer value dependent. Does the club that got relegated have the money to keep them? That type of thing, right? What kind of financial shape are they in? So I mean, I can throw out a couple names like per club.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think we've seen too many rumors for the 3 relegated clubs in terms of guys who might get bought. There were some Trafford rumors. I might be mispronouncing that. From Burnley, those have kind of died down. As you touched on, Doughty, there was a little bit of noise around Adebayo of Luton. Like if Calvert-Lewin went, maybe Everton would go there. One shout I would make is Issa Kabore, who played for Luton last year, is returning to City on loan. There was a little bit of Everton interest there, maybe. Not great fantasy points, but just someone who could end up in the Prem on another team. What else? Let's see. Vinny Souza has had some noise around him. Again, bad fantasy points, not interested. Gustavo Hammer is probably someone who deserves to be in the Prem, but again, not much noise there. Let me see if there's anyone else. Jacob, is it Jacob Ramsey or is it Aaron Ramsey?
Might be Aaron, right?
Aaron Ramsey potentially could get a move in the future, but again, he was injured for a while, so maybe not right now. Anyone else I got?
Oliver Arblaster,
Mengi.
maybe.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oliver Arblaster.
Arblaster, yeah.
But yeah,
I mean, he's club captain now, though, so surely he doesn't leave the Blades.
Well, we'll see.
Right. The latest I read, like, it's probably going to be at least a year, but he was someone that I kept season to season just with the hope that someone would buy him, but not a lot of noise there. Last one I had on my list here was blanking on his first name, but Mengi, the center back from Luton, who United sold him.
Tedden, I think. Tedden,
thank you.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm calling him out, obviously young 22-year-old center back who played pretty well last year. Decent noise around him, but more importantly, his fan track stats were actually quite good. It was very much hidden by the fact that Luton gave up a ton of goals, but his ghost points were great. So if you got to move somewhere, like say Everton, Wolves, whatever, could be useful. That's all to say. It's a total guessing game, and it again depends on a lot of different factors. So I don't really have a single name. I guess like Doughty, as you said, would maybe be the one that I would like take a punt on.
Yeah, I mean, on the whole Menji point as well, with the new updated scoring adjustments that we've had to defenders, guys like this are going to have increased value, right, moving forward. So, it's just kind of food for thought there. All right, anything to touch there, Theo? Do you want to throw in any names?
Yeah, I liked Adebayo shout. I think another player who maybe was quite dangerous for Luton was Chong. And he's obviously young.
Tahith,
with Doughty, he's an interesting one. I don't think he's actually good enough to play for most Prem teams, but his Fantrax output is so good that if he can get a spot somewhere, he's obviously Fantrax relevant. But I can tell you, I don't think many Premier League clubs will be interested in signing him. And that also speaks for the poor quality of the 3 teams that went down. I don't think many of these players will get a move. Like, someone I like is Sanderberger, but he's not really a Fantrax scorer, even if he does get a move. So, yeah, I think this is probably a fallow year for these players. There's not many of them that are particularly appealing.
Yeah.
I guess.
And do you? Sorry, go ahead, Evan.
No, I just came to the realization as you touched on Sheffield United. Like, I think one of the maybe sort of undervalued or hidden pieces here really is the guys who are on those relegated teams, but then are returning on loan to their Prem team. So I mentioned Kabore, but again, not a great fantasy scorer. But I thought of James McAtee. And someone who, of course, he was playing for a really poor team, didn't score very well, but some might believe he actually has the talent to play for a decent Prem squad. So guys like that could be technically relegated guys that could end up being useful elsewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, with the whole like the point that you mentioned, Theo, about like Doughty as well, is Luton had a particular way of playing, and what he was able to do suited their style of play. So it's like, I guess you have to kind of gauge is if, you know, X player was to come to a Prem club, you know, whatever skills or assets that, you know, he has, is he going to be able to benefit the team or club that he's going to? Or do you go for a more generalized, you know, defensive midfielder? You can plug this guy into any team and he should be able to do a job, but he's not a great Fantrax scorer sort of thing, right? So I guess you're trying to find that, you know, that fine balance between the two zones or two categories of how you want to, you know, rate these players, right? Or these assets. All right, let's move on to a next question from one of our community favorites, Ben Garside at Ben Chickens, who is in fact part of our Dynasty League, right? So his question is, top 3 tips for people wanting to set up a sustainable Dynasty setup. Evan, I'll let you go first.
I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer this. I think Theo's touched on a lot of the really important pieces already. Yeah. I'll rehash one. I think it is very much important to get a good group of people together that you are willing and will enjoy spending many years talking about footy with, right? So I think that's a really key element. You know, there's a million different rules you can change, but at the end of the day, you have to be happy to be there with the people you're there with. So I'll stop there. Theo, what do you think?
I was going to say, one of the things is, I would say you need a Ben Garside in your league.
Amen. Amen.
He's very good for keeping things ticking. Let's say if things get busy for me at work or at home, and as commissioner I might let things slip for a week, Ben will be on my case about, we need to make a decision on this. And he does it in a nice way. I'll get to it and we'll get it sorted. And it all works out fairly in the end. But as I say, if I didn't have someone like him poking me, then maybe things would slip away. So I think it doesn't have to be Ben. Obviously, there are many people in the league that do the same thing, and I think it's just important to have a commissioner like me who's flexible, but also to have people that are willing to take some responsibility and help me push things along. Because if it all falls on one guy, then it's a lot of I might just have a busy time or a bad time, and things can go all over the shop. So I think it worked quite nicely. And then, as Evan said again, sustainable is people that are going to stick around. As you know, we actually had our first change of manager this summer, but we were all prepared for it.
Yeah.
So we had plans in place, and I don't think it's an issue. I think it's normal in Dynasty for people to leave and people to take over teams. I think it's just important that you, as a league and a commissioner, you just keep an eye on teams that are dwindling and make sure that they don't become an absolute ruin, so that no one's going to want to take that team. And again, this comes back to the whole thing about it not being lots of money and competitive, because you're less likely to take over this orphan team if there's a lot of money on it. Whereas if it's just a bit of fun, then I'll take anyone. I'll take a team of free agents.
Yeah, and so I think one of the last few points I will probably mention in terms of tips, I think listen, we're all about having fun, and, you know, it's great to have, you know, having a good time and all that. But I think the way like we do like our bookkeeping and like our documentation, like the rules and all the Excel sheets and how everything is systematically laid out, I think that also enables a very enjoyable experience for everyone. Right. So you need to be organized at a certain level. Otherwise, it's just gonna fall into chaos, and I think people will lose interest very quickly. But yeah. I think that's 3 solid points. So we'll move on to our next question. So now we're gonna deviate slightly away from Dynasty. I think we got a couple of just general questions, a bit of fun questions. But yeah, we'll try and wrap up the pod, and yeah, just stick with us, guys. So our next question is from Peltier at Pel_tier. His question is who to target from promoted clubs. He mentions a few names like Mavididi? I hope I didn't butcher it. Davis, Adams, I'm assuming that is Che Adams, yeah? And then Hutchinson. Are there any other names that you guys want to throw out there? Evan, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think he touched on a lot of the big ones there. You mentioned Mavididi. I'd call out his teammate, Fatawu. I don't think you mentioned him. He's a 20-year-old right winger, and he had pretty solid stats last year, especially from like a Fantrax perspective. I think it was around like 9.5 ghost points per start. A lot of successful dribbles and a lot of defensive stats as well. Seems to have that right wing spot very nailed. So yeah, he's another one I would call out from the promoted squads. Yeah, Davis and Hutchinson for sure. One other,
and that's Leaf Davis, right?
Yep, that's the left back, 24-year-old attacking left back. From Ipswich, the next Doughty perhaps, except he's a defender, so he will get docked a bit from the goals against. But yeah, exciting one there. I'll call out one more and then I'll turn it over to Theo so I don't steal all the thunder. One of the ones I think at the moment is more under the radar. And I have done only brief research, so feel free to correct me here. But recent signing for Ipswich, Jacob Greaves, 23-year-old center back. The reason why I'm calling him out, he played for Hull last season, was because he had ridiculous ghost points last year. He averaged 4.1 aerials per 90, and he had nearly 12 ghost points per start. So one to keep an eye on. Again, I'm still researching the dynamics of who's going to actually play for Ipswich, but if he does play and they don't concede oodles of goals, he could be useful. And he's young.
All right. Theo?
Well, yeah, linked to that actually is beware of Ipswich players that were in the Ipswich side last season, because they're going to buy a lot of players, I think. We've seen kind of players signing, players linked already. They've got, I think there's going to be an overhaul, and so if your draft is soon, steer away maybe from these kind of stalwarts that might look like they've absolutely locked into 11, because they're going to upgrade that player in a lot of positions, and they'll go from playing 40 odd starts to just being a sub.
Is like Chaplin, for example. Would you?
Yeah, exactly.
Would he fall in that
so
category?
Chaplin, decent player. I know liked at his previous clubs, but I can't see him being a regular starter in the Premier League. So yeah, I would avoid him personally. And then from the other clubs, we kind of mentioned all of them already. I do like Leif Davis. I know what I've just said about Ipswich, but I think he should keep his place. He was definitely a key player for them last season. But yeah, not many interest me. I do like Fatawu probably more than anyone. And again, this comes back to what I was saying much earlier about nationalities of players. They don't have to be English. I think a Ghanaian player is more likely to stay in the Premier League than a lot of other nationalities. And so I know he played in Portugal when he was young, but I think he is someone that he could leave next season. I'll look silly, but he could be here for the next 10 years if he proves himself.
So I mean, we talk about nationalities, but before we move on from this question, now with like the Saudi league, they're poaching as many players as possible. Do we consider religion as well?
Yeah, I certainly do. I mean, not massively, but I would. Yeah, it's a risk when you think of a player. Like I have Mo Salah in my team, and let's be honest, he's going to end up in Saudi Arabia soon. Might not be this season, but eventually he's going to be a massive signing there. But it's something I factored in at the time, and there are certainly other players, but it wouldn't put me off bringing someone in because I think one day they might go to Saudi Arabia. I think if it's a Premier League player that ends up in Saudi Arabia, it probably means they're a good player. So there is somewhere a balance to be had, and there probably is a time where you want them on your roster.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, Adam Armstrong, we still think he's a terrible asset, Theo?
Yeah, I don't trust Southampton much. He scored a lot of goals last season, right? But
yeah. We'll have to bring Jacob on Inside Tracks and see what he has to say. I heard he's been getting a lot of DMs about Southampton assets now that they're back in the league. Evan, you want to mention something quickly?
No, just poor ghost points for him last season. That's it.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, let's move on to the next question. This is completely unrelated to football fan tracks. As always, from Mr. Naru, we get these random-ass hypothetical questions. So if your car was traveling at the speed of light, would your headlights work?
I guess it depends on the definition of work. Like, they'll be on, right?
True.
But they won't illuminate what's in front of you, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I guess we won't illuminate as well or something like that.
But like, if your car is driving that fast, then the road in front of you, you'll be covering the ground that the light would have been on. So I'm assuming they'll just be on, but they won't be bright for your surroundings, so they'll be pointless.
I just wonder, like, how many drugs is Mr. Naru really doing? Because the questions that he comes up with sometimes is just, it's amazing. Evan, any you want to touch on that physics debate?
It feels like something I talked about once in a physics uni class.
I
really don't know, but my slight gut is that there's something going on with relativity such that the driver would see the lights still shooting out in front of them at the same speed, and same with an observer. It's kind of like some sort of paradox. That's my guess. So I think that the driver would see the lights, it would still work, and also an observer would see them, obviously going incredibly fast.
I think I'm gonna ask my boss about this on Monday morning.
Is he based in the UK? Is Mr. Nauru based in the UK? Because energy bills would make it very difficult to afford a car that can drive that fast. Whether it's petrol or electricity, to be honest.
Oh, all right. We've got a couple more questions. So these are more like, I guess, just reflective questions before we wrap up. So it's coming from Parma Season. I'm pretty sure this is Prash. He just has a new handle, I think, every season, depending on what's going on in football. So his first question is, with the season over, what's your best ever fan track season across different leagues? So let's just kind of narrow it down to last season, right? So Evan, last season, what was your best league?
The Genie League. I won the Champions League, or whatever the top league was. Team wasn't very good, but I just streamed really aggressively throughout the season and eventually turned, hard work into talent, if you will. That I won that, and I did really poorly in the Dynasty League, and I won my home league. So yeah, it was a good year.
Nice. Theo?
I would say last year was by far my worst season in pretty much every league I play in. I was at one point consumed by the fantasy cricket that I just gave up on football. But yeah, I was just decimated by injuries everywhere I looked. A new injury. Like, I was really happy with James Maddison, for example. He was like my one good pick at the start of the season, then that didn't last long. Players like Rico Henry, they just, like, I drafted Ivan Toney hoping that I can kind of hang around till he's ready, and then I lost so many players that you can't stash players like him on your bench if the rest of your squad is also missing. So and then he came back and didn't do a lot, but just a dreadful year. But I enjoyed myself, and it was a as we say, I would say it's still a successful year because it was first season as commissioner of a new Dynasty League, and I think it went well. So
absolutely,
my favourite year, despite it being my worst year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for Dynasty, I came close to the title, 3 points shy. I mean, it probably could have been a few more points, but maybe Flesh had a bit of sympathy on me. DPL was brutal. I came up against the likes of Gavin, Ryan Barnes, and my own pod partner, Ryo, who topped all of the DPL Community League, who's now part of our Dynasty League. So, I mean, we've got champions on champions in our league, Evan. And IGL, I mean, I don't know if I even consider this a success, but I didn't qualify for promotion, but for some reason, I don't know if people dropped out or some other form or manner, I've now been promoted. So I don't know. I'll call that the win.
Excellent.
Right? That's the only win from last season. All right. So next question from Prash was, looking back at week 1, what's your best and worst player prediction in terms of draft value? Evan?
I can remember a bad one. I'm trying to think of a good one. All right, I'll just go with my bad one as I think about my good one. I was at the beginning of the season, throughout the season, and still am today, fairly high on Jack Grealish compared to the rest of everyone. And I am still of the opinion that last season, yes, he was out of form, but I think it was a lot of bad luck and timing. I think every time he almost came back, and all of a sudden people were like, wait a second, he might get his starting job back. He looks pretty good out there. He'd get injured again or something else would happen. But anyways, so yeah, I had him in like my top 15 or so drafting. Of course, his injuries kind of screwed him, but Doku also very much took his chance when given. And so the rotations just really didn't work out in his favor. And he got, I don't know, like less than 10 starts or something along those lines. On the good side of things, I'm pretty sure I was fairly high on Pedro Porro, and he turned out fairly well. Not super exciting. Oh, actually, one thing I will call out, maybe my most proud thing of last season was not winning leagues, but I had an article that was like fantasy gems or like hidden diamonds or something along those lines, and it was like calling out young players who could make an impact. Adingra was one of those, and of course injuries very much helped him as well. But there was a couple others there that I was like pretty excited about. Jared Branthwaite and a couple others. So those are the types of things that I like get very excited about, and that's hence why I enjoy Dynasty. Right? It's like the young guys who maybe not even played in the Prem. They're returning from a loan, but they look good elsewhere, and maybe they make an impact. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Theo?
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that my worst draft player for week 1 was Harry Kane, considering he was absent. There weren't many high picks last season. As I say, Rico Henry obviously didn't do much last season, but considering the season he had the year before, where he was probably not someone you wanted to own at all, his output in August and September, I imagine, last season was pretty good. Not just points, but just watching him play, it was a completely different Rico Henry. And just one to watch out for this season, to be honest.
Yeah.
If and when he's fit, he's got more responsibility going forward, and that makes a world of difference to Fantrax points.
Yeah. Great. I mean, my bad or worst player prediction was Cody Gakpo. I genuinely thought he was gonna have his breakout season. I took him, I think, as my second pick. I think I was like maybe second pick in the draft, so on the turn or whatever like that. He turned out to be a complete bust, and it's painful seeing what he's doing for the Netherlands in the Euros, and that's what you kind of expect. So it'll be interesting to see how Arne Slot uses him moving forward. For me, best pick, I've beaten this drum all of last season, and I don't know if I'll do it next season, but Nico fucking Jackson. He was basically like my third, fourth pick in almost all my drafts, and by end of season he was like nearly like a top 10 forward in the game overall, right? So I was quite happy that turned out the way it did. Okay, and final question. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I forgot one more. Someone I forgot was Rodri. I had him in basically every league, and while my seasons were bad, he was a joke. Like, considering how late you could get him in the draft.
Yeah.
He just turns up every week.
Absolute monster.
until he
Reliable
asks
as
for a
hell.
rest. He literally had to ask for a rest because he is
Yeah.
playing every week,
Yeah.
getting points. So I was very happy to draft him, but it turned out to be pretty pointless.
Did he get like nearly 18 or 19 attacking returns by the end of the season? Something crazy like that, I want to say. Is
I'm not
that
sure if it was
far-fetched to
that
say?
high, but maybe he scored a lot of key goals.
I think Evan might be fact checking that. No,
You're right.
because he
You're
came
right.
up in like
17.
yeah,
17.
yeah.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, he's an absolute monster, man. He
Oh, and
just
then-
has these clutch moments in him, right?
Abdoulaye Doucouré was the other one. He was a similar type of player, really, for
Oh,
fan
yeah.
So
tracks.
hot to
Just
start the season.
playing every week, and he was just scoring, getting assists.
Yeah,
Yeah, very happy to have him as well. But
yeah,
they were when they're your best players, you've got no chance of winning the league.
yeah. All right. Final question back from Ben Chickens. Which manager has provided the most amount of entertainment, other than Eric Ten Hag, for opposing fans from last season? Evan?
Yeah, Ten Hag was definitely up there for me. I think Pochettino's quotes in the face of defeats were always good for a laugh, for sure.
Yeah. No, as a Chelsea fan, I agree. Theo, what about for you?
I would say whoever was managing Sheffield United that week was
Oh,
providing entertainment for other teams.
Yeah. Is David Moyes a brutal pick? I don't know. Like,
Yeah, but you didn't want to watch it. It was really boring for both West Ham fans and opposition. Even when they were winning, they weren't happy, and they have every right to, because it was so attritional.
Yeah, you know what? If not David Moyes, Ange, just how real of a person he is, and seeing him absolutely cuss out his players during a match, like, don't fucking pass it back, like seeing that realness, that was pure entertainment. I mean, his style of football as well, right? The first 10 Premier League games of the season, like, yeah, he had the whole package, honestly.
Yeah. Also, Glasner towards the end of the season, I think.
Yeah.
We all saw what Roy was doing, and it was pretty dull considering the pool of talent they had.
Yeah.
And Glasner's come in and kind of lit things up. I know Elise's gone, but
Yeah.
who knows? They could still be pretty good fun to watch.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, we'll see. Anyways, listeners, that's all the time that we have for questions. Any leftover ones, we'll try to answer them in the next pod when Ryan is back. Unfortunately, I've taken up enough time from these lovely, lovely gentlemen. Lads, thank you so much for your time to chat everything Dynasty. It's been a pleasure. It's been a while since I've spoken to you guys as well. It's good to see your faces. I mean, you're only gonna listen to the audio version. There's no video, unfortunately. We'll see about that, in the future. We'll think about that. I know there's been requests, but any final pieces of advice or final things you want to throw out there, Evan? I'll start with you.
No, thank you so much for having us. It's been fun. Definitely get into Dynasty if you want to go another, level deeper. You want to nerd out about young players or hold on to your favorite guys for 3 years and hope they pan out. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, agreed. Theo?
Yeah, I think touching on what Evans was saying there, like it's deeper, but it's also slower. So don't feel like it's really intense and you have to be mad keen to do it. Like there's a different angle to it, and you could, if anything, you could step back from redraft and just kind of slowly roll through a Dynasty League. Have your quiet times, have your fun times. Like it's not going anywhere. You've got years to build a roster. You could easily take 3 months off where your team's just terrible, and you come back to it. And I think it's both deep and it's a great chance to show your knowledge to people, learn about players, but also take it slow.
Yeah, definitely about learning. I've learned so many names that I have no idea who these people are. Like, yeah, it's been a great experience so far, and looking forward to the next 8 years, lads.
Absolutely.
Let's go. All right, listeners, thanks again for tuning in to another Banter Pod. Keep your eyes peeled. Inside Track series is gonna be starting right around the corner. So yeah, we'll catch you when we catch you. We'll see you when we see you. Anyways, peace.